Hello everyone, this is Jen and I make useful English Lit study videos on Shakespeare, poetry, fiction, literary devices and more to help you become a literary expert. And if this sounds good and useful to you, don't forget to subscribe by hitting the button below. So in today's video, we are analysing Hamlet's Speak the Speech I Pray You speech at the start of Act 3, Scene 2. When the prince instructs the dramatic troupe on the manner and style with which he'd like them to deliver their Murder of Gonzago performance in front of Claudius and Gertrude later, in the process sharing his views on what makes good, sophisticated theatre. Now, this moment is important as a piece of meta-theatrical commentary, with a common line of interpretation being that Hamlet here is ventriloquizing Shakespeare's own thoughts on the nature and audience of his professional trade. Now, short of committing the so-called intentional fallacy of mapping the real author's voice with that of the fictional character, this line of interpretation seems to ignore some of the more puzzling nuances lurking within Hamlet's remarks here. So instead, what I'd like to argue, in addition to possibly reflecting Shakespeare's personal views on drama, is that Hamlet's words here dramatize a key challenge faced by actors back then and even today, which is that how should one perform the character when what the character says seems to conflict with how the playwright wants him to say it? Now, another function that this speech achieves is to show just how versatile and adaptable theatre is as a mode of communication, as different audience groups could react very differently to the same set of words and lines delivered. So don't worry if this all sounds a bit overwhelming and complicated right now. It will make sense, I promise, as we get into the analysis. So with that, let's dive straight in. Now, the start of Hamlet's speech reveals a telling irony. While he counsels moderation in the actor's temperance and cautions against tempestuous whirlwinds of passion, he promptly contradicts his own advice by delivering a torrent of emotionally charged critique. Now, if we consider Hamlet in the fictional capacity as a prince, this contradiction isn't really a problem because, after all, a prince isn't a professional actor, maybe a political one, but not a professional one. But the interesting thing here is that whoever's delivering these lines in reality on stage is a professional actor, which creates a cognitive dissonance whereby Hamlet, the actor, feels like he's been scripted to act emotionally, and yet Hamlet, his character, is commenting at this precise moment on how acting emotionally is undesirable. So this mental split is reflected in the contrast between the chaotic, careening syntax versus the notion of calmness and consistency in the following message, as when he says, "Nor do not saw the air too much with your hand, thus, but use all gently. For in the very torrent, tempest, and as I may say, the whirlwind of passion, you must acquire and beget a temperance that may give it smoothness." And note the hesitant, paraphrastic restatement of "in the very torrent, tempest, and as I may say, the whirlwind of passion," and the jolting bumpiness of the sentence structure here. These suggest that while Hamlet may seem authoritative as this prince doling out dramatic instructions, internally he is working and struggling through his own tempest-like thoughts, expressing a desire for dramatic smoothness in performance through what are rather unsmooth lines, and is very much then under the influence of his passions, despite his apparent contempt for them. Now, as his tract continues, Hamlet's turbulent emotions intensify, in fact, with the "oh" apostrophe when he pronounces, "Oh, it offends me to the soul to hear a robustious periwig-pated fellow tear a passion to tatters, to very rags, to split the ears of the groundlings, who for the most part are capable of nothing but inexplicable dumb shows and noise. I would have such a fellow whipped for overdoing termagant. It out Herods Herod. Pray you, avoid it." Now, ironically, Hamlet seems to be taking on the demeanour of a robustious periwig-pated fellow, with his hyperbolic complaint of how it offends me to the soul, and these crude actors tearing a passion to tatters to very rags. The polysyllabic diction of robustious periwig-pated could also be a self-conscious way for Hamlet to distinguish his superiority from the lowly groundlings which he so scorns. These groundlings refer to the lowest paying standing audience members at those open-air playhouses back in Shakespeare's time. But while Hamlet claims that these commoners are crass consumers of overblown emotional spectacle, what he calls inexplicable dumb shows and noise, Hamlet seems to be himself at this very moment exhibiting, at least to some degree, this kind of melodramatic theatricality that he so openly disdains. By the way, guys, if you find this video helpful so far, I'd massively appreciate it if you could hit the thumbs up button below and subscribe to my channel so that you don't miss out on any of my top grade lit study content going forward. I'd also encourage you to check out my membership program by clicking the join button below if you want exclusive access to members only study content and make special video requests. I'll see you there. His violent remark that he would have such a fellow whipped for overdoing Termagant comes across disproportionate to the actual need, while the exaggerated anthemeria of it out-Herods Herod belies an overcompensatory impulse to discount emotional expression in dramatic performance. And this overcompensation perhaps stems from Hamlet's subconscious awareness that he is, out of all people, the most vulnerable to excessive shows of emotionality, as we will have seen from various other moments and speeches in the play, not least his vitriolic outburst towards Ophelia when he tells her to get thee to a nunnery. As an actor attempting to play Hamlet in this moment, then, he may struggle with the dilemma of delivering such emotionally charged words with the heightened self-consciousness of not being too emotional, or else risk exhibiting the natural emotionality inherent in Shakespeare's lines, thus creating an ironic effect and complicating the audience's response to Hamlet. Now, what is the function of drama? According to Hamlet, the purpose of playing, whose end, both at the first and now, was and is to hold, as 'twere, the mirror up to nature, to show virtue her own feature, scorn her own image, and the very agent body of the time his form and pressure. So this view of theatre is realistic, as Hamlet asserts that theatre has a practical use of reflecting back at us our nature, virtue, and own image, as well as the broader social situation with the very age and body of the time. But whether this function is moralistic or introspective really depends on the receiver. Now, to the Protestants and Puritans in Shakespeare's time, who believed that theatre was a sinful place of vulgar spectacle, Shakespeare may have been embedding this message as a way of reassuring them that theatre, well, at the very least, good theatre, promotes virtue and is not overdone or showy in the matter of Catholic ceremonial pomp and circumstance. Yet being Shakespeare, of course, these lines could just as equally be read in a much less didactic and more ambiguous light. The message being that drama, in its essence, simply highlights for us our motivations, impulses, and behaviour, thus activating philosophical introspection or emotional reaction. The latter, which Hamlet hopes to invite from Claudius later in this act as a sign of guilt over having killed his father for the Danish throne. But as Hamlet continues his speech, he raises an important question of whether the theatre's version of reality is objectively reliable. After all, different audiences could view the same characters, understand the same narrative, and receive the same speech in vastly different ways. As he says, "Now this overdone or come tardy off, though it make the unskilful laugh, cannot but make the judicious grieve. The censure of the which one must in your allowance overweigh a whole theatre of others. Oh, there be players that I have seen play and heard others praise, and that highly, not to speak profanely, that neither having the accent of Christians nor the gait of Christian, pagan nor man, have so strutted and bellowed. Oh, that I have thought some of nature's journeymen had made men, and not made them well. They imitated humanity so abominably." Now, while the immediate apparent point here may seem like Hamlet's criticism of overdone, unsophisticated acting, Shakespeare is perhaps conveying a much more nuanced and less judgmental message about how even over-the-top performances and those strutting and bellowing actors could attract their own crowd. In other words, the world of the stage is actually big enough to accommodate styles for different tastes, unskillful or judicious, Christian or pagan, regardless of what one individual prefers. So this notion of how different playgoer segments could respond very differently to the same text becomes especially interesting if we consider Shakespeare's performance context, as the Lord Chamberlain's Men, which is what his acting company back in Elizabeth I's reign would have been called, would have staged Hamlet in front of both public commoner playgoers, many of whom would be those groundlings standing at the Globe, as well as private aristocratic coterie audiences at more expensive spaces like the Blackfriars. So if Hamlet's arrogant disdain for those unskillful whole theatre of others rubbed the groundling audiences back then the wrong way, Shakespeare could always chalk it up to his characterization of Hamlet and reinforce the impression of his tragic hero as being all the more a flawed human figure. On the other hand, to the Blackfriar elite audiences, Hamlet's smugness may resonate with or even flatter their sense of socio-cultural superiority, and by extension, maybe even earn Shakespeare some goodwill brownie points with these potential patrons. And that would have certainly been a key financial consideration for playwrights like Shakespeare, many of whom depended on such aristocrats as a source of financial support to keep writing plays. We see then that far from being a narrowly prescribed art form, theatre is a versatile and flexible tool of communication, and one which allows for a variety of styles, range of perspective, and possibilities for interpretation. And that's it for my analysis of Hamlet Speak, the speech I pray you've seen, everyone. I hope this gave you some fresh insights into both Hamlet's psyche and Shakespeare's dramatic views, which you can always, of course, reference and use to create your own interpretation for your work. In your next video, I recommend that you watch my analysis on Hamlet's "Oh, Poor Yorick" speech in the Gravedigger scene, which is, of course, another super important moment in the play. And you can check that out here. Click the join button below to be part of my membership program if you want personalized essay feedback, make exclusive video requests, and access members-only content. Please hit the thumbs up button below if you found this video useful in any way, so I'll be encouraged to keep making these weekly study videos for you and other passionate lit learners all around the world. Please subscribe if you haven't already and hit that bell notification so you don't miss out on any of my videos going forward. And I will see you guys, as always, in the next one. Bye!